Every great transformation begins with a single spark, a moment when an ordinary event turns into an extraordinary realization. For the beggar in our story, that spark came from a single conversation at a crowded railway station. He was doing what he did every day, walking from one compartment to another, stretching out his hand, asking for a few coins, a few morsels of kindness to fill his empty stomach. But that day was different. That day, destiny had planned a meeting between the beggar and a man who wasn't going to give him money, but something far more valuable. A lesson that would change his life forever. The beggar noticed a tall man in a fine suit, confident, successful, and obviously wealthy. Like any beggar would, he thought, "This man looks rich, he'll surely give me a good amount." So he approached him, expecting charity. But instead of money, the man looked straight into his eyes and asked a question no one had ever asked him before. "You keep asking people for something every day. Tell me, do you ever give anything to anyone?" The beggar was stunned. In all his years of begging, no one had spoken to him like that. He stammered, "Sir, I'm just a beggar. I only ask people for money. How could I possibly give anything to anyone?" The man smiled calmly and said, something that would stay with the beggar for the rest of his life, "If you cannot give anything, you have no right to ask for anything either. I am a businessman. I believe in transactions. Give and take. I can only give you something if you have something to offer in return." And with that, the man boarded his train and disappeared. The beggar stood there in silence, the noise of the trains fading into the background. His mind replayed those words again and again. You have no right to ask if you cannot give. For the first time, he questioned his own existence. All his life, he had believed that his role was to beg, to stretch out his hand and wait for someone else's mercy. But now, someone had challenged that belief. The businessman hadn't insulted him, he had awakened him. That night, the beggar couldn't sleep. The businessman's words echoed like a rhythm in his head. He realized something profound. Life itself is a transaction. Nature, society, success, everything works on the principle of give and take. Think about it. Even nature doesn't give us anything for free. We plant a seed, water it, nurture it, and only then does it give us fruit. We breathe in oxygen and give out carbon dioxide. The trees do the opposite. The entire ecosystem runs on this invisible law of exchange. The beggar began to see that he had been breaking that law his whole life. He only wanted to receive, but never thought of giving. No wonder his life never changed. He began to ask himself deeper questions. What can I give? I'm poor. I own nothing. But then another thought followed. Maybe I don't have money, but is money the only thing worth giving? This question became the seed of his transformation. In the next few days, he couldn't stop thinking. The businessman had planted an idea, and it was growing inside him. He began to notice the world differently. He saw people smiling, helping each other, exchanging greetings, gifts, emotions, giving something, receiving something. That was the essence of every relationship, every success, every act of happiness. Giving first. That realization changed the beggar's energy. He was no longer bitter or helpless. He was searching for something he could give back to the world. Then, one morning he saw it. A few flowers blooming near the railway station. Simple, colorful, beautiful. And in that moment the answer revealed itself. He smiled and said to himself, I may not have money to give, but I can give these flowers. I can give beauty. I can give joy. That was the first true act of giving in his life. After learning the powerful lesson of giving and receiving, the beggar's world began to look different. Nothing around him had changed. The same noisy railway station, the same passing trains, the same crowd, and yet, something within him had shifted. It was as if the businessman's words had awakened a sleeping part of his soul. The beggar could no longer look at himself the same way. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just thinking about what he could get from others, he was thinking about what he could offer to the world. That inner shift, from asking to offering, was the true beginning of his transformation. For 2 days, the beggar kept thinking about how he could give something back. Every time he saw passengers walking by, he imagined himself not as a beggar, but as someone capable of giving, of contributing. Yet, each time reality hit him hard. He thought, I have nothing. No home, no money, no possessions. What could I possibly give? He spent those 2 days searching for an answer, but all he found were more questions. And then, on the third morning, something extraordinary happened, not outside, but inside him. As he sat quietly near the station, his eyes fell on a patch of flowers growing by the railway tracks. They were simple wildflowers, bright, colorful, and full of life. He gazed at them for a while, and a thought bloomed in his mind. These flowers, they don't ask anyone for anything. They just give their beauty, their fragrance, their joy, freely. Maybe I can learn from them. Maybe I can give these flowers to others. That single thought changed everything. He plucked a few flowers, held them gently, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Purpose. That day, when he boarded the train to beg, he did something different. For every person who gave him alms, he offered a flower in return. Some passengers smiled in surprise, others accepted the flowers with joy. A few even laughed, touched by his gesture, and that was the beginning of his new life, the birth of a giver. Within days, something remarkable happened. More people began giving him money. His bowl filled faster than ever before. The same passengers who used to ignore him now waited eagerly to receive a flower from him. The beggar soon realized that the world hadn't changed. He had changed. His mindset had shifted from scarcity to abundance. He was no longer focused on what he lacked. He was focused on what he could create and share. That's the magic of mindset, the invisible force that shapes everything in our lives. For the beggar, that turning point arrived the day he decided to give flowers. It began as a small idea, almost too simple to seem powerful. Yet, as we often discover, the simplest ideas carry the deepest wisdom. The beggar's life had been filled with emptiness, repetition, and despair. Every day looked like the one before. The same routine of stretching his hand, receiving a few coins, and waiting for night to fall. But that morning, when he plucked those flowers by the railway tracks, something felt different. The flowers were bright, alive, and full of color. Everything his life was not. As he held them, he felt as if he was holding a piece of hope, a symbol of new beginnings. He thought, I may not have wealth to give, but I can give beauty. I can share joy. I can offer these flowers to those who show me kindness. It was a small act, but it carried a big shift in intention. That day when he walked into the train compartments, his hands didn't just hold an empty bowl, they held a gift. As he approached a passenger and received a coin, he smiled and said, Thank you, sir. Here, please take this flower. The passenger looked at him in surprise. No one had ever seen a beggar give something back. The man accepted the flower, smiled, and kept it carefully in his pocket. A few others saw what had happened and were moved. One by one, more passengers began to offer the beggar coins. Not out of pity, but out of appreciation. By the time the train left the station, the beggar's bowl was fuller than it had been in months. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like a beggar. He felt like a giver, like someone who had something of value to share with the world. And that feeling changed everything. From that day forward, he made it his daily ritual. Every morning, he would pluck as many flowers as he could find near the station. Sometimes a handful, sometimes an armful, and head toward the trains. The passengers started recognizing him. The flower man, they would say, smiling as he approached. Some even waited for him, hoping to get one of his small flowers before their journey began. He had unknowingly built something extraordinary. Trust. People weren't just giving him coins anymore. They were giving him attention, respect, and warmth. His act of giving had turned a simple transaction into a moment of connection. That's the beauty of giving. It transforms both the giver and the receiver. When you give with sincerity, the energy you release returns to you multiplied. The beggar began to notice this truth every single day. The more he gave, the more he received. The more he smiled, the more people smiled back. The more joy he shared, the more joy came back to him. And without realizing it, he had stepped into the very principle the businessman had once spoken about. The law of give and take. But this time, he was living it. His act of giving flowers wasn't about strategy or profit. It was about heart. He gave because he wanted to express gratitude. He gave because it made him feel alive, and that authenticity is what people felt. Soon, his reputation spread. Passengers told others about the kind man who gave flowers in return for alms. They called him the flower beggar, though in truth, he was no longer a beggar in spirit. He had turned an act of survival into an act of grace, and in that transformation lies a timeless lesson for all of us. You see, life changes the moment you stop focusing on what you lack and start using what you already have. The beggar didn't wait for miracles, for someone to save him, or for luck to strike. He used what was right in front of him, a few flowers and a grateful heart, to create his turning point. How often do we underestimate the small things in our own lives? We think we need huge resources to make a difference. Money, power, connections. But the truth is, change begins with what's already within our reach. The beggar's flowers were not just gifts. They were symbols of possibility. Each flower represented the idea that no matter how little you have, you still have something to give. And that something can become the seed of your transformation. With every flower he handed out, he wasn't just giving beauty. He was planting seeds of kindness in people's hearts. And those seeds grew, not only in others but within him too. He began to see himself differently. His sense of dignity returned. His confidence grew. The world that once ignored him now noticed him, and that's what happens when you choose to give. You stop being invisible. When you give sincerely, you stand out, because giving is the language of greatness. One day, he even thought to himself, maybe I'm not a beggar anymore. Maybe I'm something else now, a trader, a giver, a businessman of happiness. And he was right, though he didn't know it yet. That small act of giving flowers was preparing him for something far greater. The realization that would soon change not just his income, but his identity. For the flower man, belief was the final key that unlocked everything. He had learned how to give. He had learned how to create value. But now, he was about to learn the most powerful lesson of all. That the limits of your life are defined not by your circumstances, but by your thinking. It happened one evening as he sat by the platform after a long day's work. His basket was empty. All the flowers sold out. In his hand was a small pile of coins, glimmering under the dim light. As he counted his earnings, a thought came to him. If I can sell flowers here, why not sell them elsewhere? Why not to temples, weddings, hotels? That thought, that one small idea, was the beginning of a new chapter. He realized something profound. Every successful person he had ever seen, from the vendors at the station to the wealthy businessman who once advised him, had one thing in common. They all thought big. They didn't let their situation define their imagination. They didn't say, "This is all I can do." They said, "What else can I become?" That night, the flower man made a promise to himself. I will no longer think like a beggar who hopes. I will think like a businessman who builds. And that single shift, from hoping to building, changed his entire destiny. He began setting small goals. He wanted to double his earnings. Then he wanted to buy a stall instead of sitting by the railway tracks. Then he dreamed of having people work for him. At first, the dreams seemed impossible. But each time doubt crept in, he reminded himself, didn't everyone once think I couldn't even earn a rupee? Didn't I prove them wrong already? That's the power of belief. Once you see what you're capable of, you can never go back to thinking small again. He started saving more aggressively, buying in bulk, negotiating better prices, and learning from other traders. Slowly, his operations expanded. He rented a small shop near the main market, a place where people could easily find him. The sign above his stall read, "The Flower Man," spreading smiles. It wasn't just a business name, it was a reflection of his journey. Each morning, as he opened his shop, he would look at that sign and remind himself of how far he had come, from begging at the railway station to owning his own flower shop. And every evening, when customers smiled while picking out flowers for loved ones, he felt something deeper than pride. He felt purpose. He had finally discovered what self-belief truly means. It's not arrogance. It's not blind optimism. It's quiet conviction, the kind that says, I was born to grow. The flower man's growth didn't stop there. With time, his business flourished. He employed other poor men who once begged near the station, teaching them the same lessons the businessman had once taught him. Don't just ask, give. Don't just survive, serve. Don't just work, believe. His flower shop became a symbol of hope, not just for him but for many who saw him and thought, if he can do it, so can I. And that's what thinking big does. It doesn't just elevate you, it inspires everyone around you. He began to dream even higher. He wanted to open more shops, to supply flowers to events and temples across the city. His belief had become unshakable. Not because life was suddenly easy, but because he now knew how to face challenges without giving up, because belief doesn't make life effortless. It makes you unstoppable. He often remembered the businessman who once said, "You receive only when you give something in return." But now, he had learned to add something even greater. You grow only when you believe you can. Self-belief had turned a beggar into a businessman, and thinking big was now turning that businessman into a leader. When people asked him how he achieved it all, he would smile and say, "I stopped seeing myself as poor. The day I saw myself as capable, the world began to agree." That's the secret most people miss. The world doesn't believe in you until you do. The mirror doesn't reflect success until you first see it in your mind, and that's the power of thinking big. It forces you to rise to the level of your vision. The Flower Man's story teaches us something profound. It's not the size of your wallet that defines your destiny. It's the size of your thinking. If you think small, your world stays small. If you think big, your world expands to meet your imagination. Your thoughts are the soil in which your future grows. Plant small dreams and you'll harvest small results. Plant big dreams, water them with belief, and the universe itself becomes your garden. The beggar's journey ended not with money in his hand, but belief in his heart. That was his real wealth, because when you believe in yourself, even the impossible begins to bend in your favor. So, remember this, no matter where you start, no matter how low you feel, you can rise. All it takes is one thought, one act of courage, and one decision to think bigger than your fear. The Flower Man's story is not about flowers, or business, or luck. It's about mindset. He began as a beggar who asked, became a giver who offered, and transformed into a creator who believed. And that is the journey each of us is called to make. From doubt to belief, from survival to success, from small thinking to big living. Because when you dare to believe in yourself, you don't just change your life. You inspire the world to believe that transformation is possible for them too.